Okay, today we're on A Long Walk to Water, chapters 16 and 17. Chapter 16 starts with Naya, Southern Sudan, 2009. After the excitement of seeing that first spray of water, the villagers went back to work. Several men gathered in front of Naya's house. They had tools with them, hoes and spades and scythes. Her father went out to meet them. The men walked together to a spot beyond the second big tree and began clearing the land. Naya watched them for a few moments. Her father saw her and waved. She put the plastic can down and ran over to him. "Papa, what are you doing?" "Clearing the land here, getting ready to build." "To build what?" Naya's father smiled. "Can't you guess?" So, number 1, can you guess? What are they building now in Naya's village? Make your own prediction about what you think they might be building. And then we're on, remember, Salva is now in Rochester, New York. 1996 to 2003. Salva had been in Rochester for nearly a month and still had not seen a single dirt road. Unlike Southern Sudan, it seemed that here in America every road was paved. At times the cars whizzed by so fast he was amazed that anyone on foot could cross safely. His new father, Chris, told him that dirt roads did exist out in the countryside, but there were none in Salva's new neighborhood. All the buildings had electricity. There were white people everywhere. Snow fell from the sky for hours at a time and then stayed on the ground for days. Sometimes it would start to melt during the day, but before it all disappeared, more snow would fall. Salva's new mother, Louise, told him it would probably be April, 3 more months, before the snow went away completely. The first several weeks of Salva's new life were so bewildering that he was grateful for his studies. His lessons, especially English, gave him something to concentrate on, a way to block out the confusion for an hour or two at a time. His new family helped them. All of them were kind to him, patiently explaining the millions of things he had to learn. It had taken 4 days for Salva to travel from the Ifo refugee camp to his new home in New York. There were times when he could hardly believe he was still on the same planet. Now that Salva was learning more than a few simple words, he found the English language quite confusing. Like the letters O-U-G-H, rough, though, fought, through, bow. The same letters were pronounced in so many different ways. Or how a word had to be changed depending on the sentence. You said chickens when you meant the living birds that walked and squawked and laid eggs, but it was chicken with no S when it was on your plate ready to be eaten. We're having chicken for dinner. That was correct, even if you had cooked 100 chickens. Sometimes he wondered if he would ever be able to speak and read English well. But slowly, with hours of hard work over the months and years, his English improved. Remembering Michael, Salva also joined a volleyball team. It was fun playing volleyball just as it had been at the camp. Setting and spiking the ball were the same in any language. Salva had been in Rochester for more than 6 years now. He was going to college and had decided to study business. He had a vague idea that he would like to return to Sudan someday to help the people who lived there. Sometimes that seemed like an impossible notion. In his homeland, there was so much war and destruction, poverty, disease, and starvation. So many problems that had not been solved by governments or rich people or big aid organizations. What could he possibly do to help? Salva thought about this question a lot, but no answer came to him. One evening, at the end of a long day of study, Salva sat down at the family computer and opened his email. He was surprised to see a message from a cousin of his, someone he barely knew. The cousin was working for a relief agency in Zimbabwe. Salva clicked open the message. His eyes read the words, but at first his brain could not comprehend them. United Nations Clinic, your father, stomach surgery. Salva read the words again and again, and then he jumped to his feet and ran through the house to find Chris and Louise. "My father!" he shouted. "They have found my father!" After several exchanges of emails, Salva learned that the cousin had not actually seen or spoken to his father. The clinic where his father was recovering was in a remote part of southern Sudan. There was no telephone or email service, no way of communicating with the clinic staff. The staff kept lists of all the patients they treated. These lists were submitted to the United Nations aid agencies. Salva's cousin worked for one of the agencies, and he had seen the name of Salva's father on the list. Salva immediately began planning to travel to Sudan, but with the war still raging, it was very difficult to make the arrangements. He had to get permits, fill out dozens of forms, and organize plane flights and car transport in a region where there were no airports or roads. Salva and Chris and Louise as well spent hours on the phone to various agencies and offices. It took not days or weeks, but months before the plans were in place, and there was no way to get a message to the hospital. At times, Salva felt almost frantic at the delay and frustrations. What if my father leaves the hospital without telling anyone where he is going? What if I get there too late? I will never be able to find him again. At last, all the forms were filled out and all the paperwork was in order. Salva flew in a jet to New York City, another one to Amsterdam, and a third to Kampala in Uganda. In Kampala, it took him 2 days to get through customs and immigration before he could board a smaller plane to go to Juba in southern Sudan. Then he rode in a jeep on dusty dirt roads into the bush. How familiar everything was, and yet how different. The unpaved roads, the scrubby bushes and trees, the huts roofed with sticks bound together, everything was just as Salva remembered it, as if he had left only yesterday. At the same time, the memories of his life in Sudan were very distant. How could memories feel so close and so far away at the same time? After many hours of jolting and bumping along the roads in the jeep, after nearly a week of exhausting travel, Salva entered the shanty that served as a recovery room at the makeshift hospital. A white woman stood to greet him. "Hello," he said. "I am looking for a patient named Mawian Dut Arik." Number 2. Why can Salva hardly believe he was on the same planet as he was in Ifo, give evidence to support your response. I mean, so many things have changed. The fact that the roads are paved, the fact that the houses have electricity, the snow on the ground, the temperatures, all of that was just so different to him. And question 3, how long has Salva been in Rochester when he receives information about his father? And what does he learn about his father? Well, I'm going to have to look back here. He'd been in Rochester more than 6 years when he finally received information about his father. And that information was that his father was in a hospital in rural southern Sudan. Chapter 17, Southern Sudan, 2009 with Naya. What do you think they are building here? Naya's father asked, smiling. A house, Naya guessed, or a barn? Her father shook his head. Something better, he said. A school. Naya's eyes widened. The nearest school was half a day's walk from their home. Naya knew this because Depp had wanted to go there, but it was too far. A school? She echoed. Yes, he replied. With the well here, no one will have to go to the pond anymore, so all the children will be able to go to school. Naya stared at her father. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. When at last she was able to speak, it was only in a whisper. All the children, Papa? The girls, too? Her father's smile grew broader. Yes, Naya, girls, too, he said. Now go and fetch water for us. And he returned to work scything the long grass. Naya went back and picked up the plastic can. She felt as if she were flying. School! She would learn to read and write. Number 1, what are they now building in Naya's village? A school. And what does this mean for Naya? It means that she can finally go to school. She can learn to read and write. She used to have to spend 8 hours a day walking back and forth to provide water for her family. So this well has not only provided water, but it's given her a chance to go to school. Sudan and Rochester, New York, 2003 to 2007. Salva stood at the foot of one of the beds in the crowded clinic. Hello, he said. Hello, the patient replied politely. I've come to visit you, Salva said. To visit me? The man frowned. But who are you? You are Mawian Dut Arik, aren't you? Yes, that is my name. Salva smiled, his insides trembling. Even though his father looked older now, Salva had recognized him right away. But it was as if his eyes needed help from his ears. He needed to hear his father's words to believe he was real. I am your son. I am Salva. The man looked at Salva and shook his head. No, he said, it is not possible. Yes, Salva said, it's me, father. He moved to the side of the bed. Mawian Dut reached out and touched the arm of this tall stranger beside him. Salva, he whispered, can it really be you? Salva waited. Mawian Dut stared for a long moment, and then he cried out, Salva, my son, my son! His body, shaking with sobs of joy, he reached up to hug Salva tightly. It had been almost 19 years since they had last seen each other. Mawian Dut sprinkled water on his son's head, the Dinka way of blessing someone who was lost and is found again. Everyone was sure you were dead, Maui and Dut said. The village wanted to kill a cow for you. That was how Salva's people mourned the death of a loved one. I would not let them, his father said. I never gave up hope that you were still alive somewhere. And my mother? Salva asked, barely daring to hope. His father smiled. She's back in the village. Salva wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. I must see her. But his father shook his head. There's still a war near Lunarik, my son. If you went there, both sides would try to force you to fight with them. You must not go. There was so much more to talk about. His father told Salva that his sisters were with their mother, but of his 3 brothers, only Ring had survived the war. Arik, the oldest, and Kual, the youngest, were both dead. Little Kual. Salva closed his eyes for a few moments, trying to picture his brothers through a haze of time and grief. He learned more about his father's illness. Years of drinking contaminated water had left Maui and Dut's entire digestive system riddled with guinea worms. Sick and weak, he had walked almost 300 miles to come to this clinic and was barely alive by the time he finally arrived. Salva and his father had several days together, but all too soon it was time for Salva to return to America. His father would be leaving the clinic shortly as well. The surgery he had undergone had been successful, and he would soon be strong enough to make the long walk home. I will come to the village, Salva promised, as soon as it is safe. We will be there waiting for you, his father promised in turn. Salva pressed his face tightly to his father's as they hugged goodbye, their tears flowing and blending together. On the plane back to the United States, Salva replayed in his mind every moment of his visit with his father. He felt again the coolness on his brow when his father had sprinkled the water blessing on him. And an idea came to him, an idea of what he might be able to do to help the people of Sudan. Could he do it? It would take so much work. Perhaps it would be too difficult. But how would he know unless he tried? Back in Rochester, Salva began working on his idea. There were, it seemed, a million problems to be solved. He needed a lot of help. Chris and Louise gave him many suggestions. Scott, a friend of theirs, was an expert in setting up projects like the one Salva had in mind. He and Salva worked together for hours and days, which grew into weeks and months. Along the way, Salva met other people who wanted to help. He was grateful to all of them, but even with their help, it was much more work than he had imagined. Salva had to raise money for the project, and there was only one way to do this. He would have to talk to people and ask them to give money. The first time Salva spoke in front of an audience was in a school cafeteria. About 100 people had come to hear him. There was a microphone at the front of the room. Salva's knees were shaking as he walked to the mic. He knew that his English was not very good. What if he made mistakes in pronunciation? What if the audience couldn't understand him? But he had to do it. If he didn't talk about the project, no one would learn about it. No one would donate money, and he would never be able to make it work. Salva spoke into the microphone. Hello, he said. At that moment, something went wrong with the sound system. The speakers behind him let out a dreadful screech. Salva jumped and almost dropped the mic. His hands trembling, he looked out at the audience. People were smiling or chuckling. A few of the children were holding their ears. They all looked very friendly, and seeing the children made him remember. It was not the first time he had spoken in front of a large group of people. Years before, when he was leading those boys on their walk from the Ethiopian refugee camp to the one in Kenya, he had called a meeting every morning and every evening. The boys would line up facing him, and he would talk to them about their plans. All those eyes looking at him, but every face interested in what he had to say. It was the same here. The audience had come to the school cafeteria because they wanted to hear him. Thinking of that made him feel a little better, and he spoke into the mic again. Hello, he repeated, and this time only his voice came from the speakers. He smiled in relief and went on. I am here to talk to you about a project for Southern Sudan. A year passed, then 2, then 3. Salva spoke to hundreds of people, in churches, at civic organizations, in schools. Would he ever be able to turn his idea into reality? Whenever he found himself losing hope, Salva would take a deep breath and think of his uncle's words. A step at a time, one problem at a time. Just figure out this one problem. Day by day, solving one problem at a time, Salva moved toward his goal. Number 2, how old is Salva at this point in the story? It had been almost 19 years since they had last seen each other. And we'd have to look back. You need to look back and see how old he was at the beginning of the story. And add 19 years to that. I don't have that answer right in front of me. You have to look back at your answers and add to find out how old he is now. Number 3, upon returning to Sudan, what does Salva learn about his family? Well, he learns that his mother and his sisters are still alive, and one brother, and 2 of his brothers have passed away. What text-based inferences can you make about what Salva might be planning to do to help his people in southern Sudan? So towards the end of the chapter here that he is planning something to help the people in southern Sudan. So you need to make your best educated guess about what it is that he's planning to do to help them. And then number 5, how is Salva's uncle still helping him after all his years? Well, he remembers what his uncle told him about just setting a short goal and making it to that. We can walk to that bush, and then we're going to walk to that tree. And so as he's working on this big project, he can make a short goal for himself and then another short goal until he gets it done. So we just have one more chapter in the book. We'll wrap it all up next time.